What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at Nerd Tees, and boy am I going to need them today. Welcome to the Eastern and Western Division Finals episode of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2022 CFL regular season and postseason, and as you can probably tell by the quality of my voice, you boys a little under the weather. It's, I think it's just like late seasonal allergies or something, but I've been dealing with it for a couple of days, and the nose is not being cooperative, so I sound a little nasally today. So we're going to try to get through today's episode relatively quickly. If you watched the episode last week, you're probably wondering, boy, Justin, how did you do in the first round of the playoffs? It was immaculate. It was scintillating. I got 1 of 6. Things did not go well. I think the only thing I got was the under in the East Division final. Really gross. But look, we've been talking about it all season long. Both of those games, with the spreads being so close to each other, they're either 2-0 games or 0-2. You're either going to get both things correct or you're going to get both things wrong. And I went 0-2 twice. And I went even money on the totals, and Bob's your uncle. So I didn't exactly light things on fire in CFL fantasy in the first round of the playoffs either. Only 35.3 points, which was, honestly, it was about middle of the pack in the official Atlantic Schooners League. But again, I was very heavy on the Calgary Stampeders, and I think they scored 16 points. So it didn't go overly well. Shout out to my MVP from last week, Hamilton wide receiver Stephen Dunbar. 3 catches for 52 yards and a touchdown. And if 14.2 points was my MVP, that tells you all you should need to know about how my week went. I think I will push the fantasy roster to the end of the episode because I don't want to tip my hat too much before we get to talk about the games. But your division finals, the East final taking place in Toronto, the Montreal Alouettes visiting the Toronto Argonauts, and the West final, the BC Lions, victorious last week over Calgary, now get to travel up to Winnipeg to take on Colaros and the Blue Bombers. So we'll start by talking about the East Final. Montreal took down Hamilton last week 28-17, which of course leads them into this game against the Argos. Montreal now 10-9 on the season, had an over 500 record away from home this year at 5-4. Now they were outscored very marginally by like literally less than a point a game in those road games, but they were outscored 246-240. But last week, virtuoso performance for the Montreal Alouettes. Full marks for them in that game last week. They had 388 yards of total offense. They only gave up 287. Look, just right from the jump, that's a very successful game. They ran for 145 rushing yards on 20 carries and 2 rushing touchdowns. So much of Montreal's offense was propelled on the ground, and honestly, Hamilton just had no answer for that run game. But they also had no answer for the defense. The Alouettes defense generating 3 turnovers off the Ticats, as well as 6 quarterback sacks. They could not protect their quarterback, and it led to multiple turnovers. Montreal wins the day, and it was an excellent performance. The Toronto Argos finished this season 11-7 and had an above 500 record in their building, but only at 5-4. They did outscore opponents 231-209 in their home games this year. So what is that? That's a 22-point difference in 9 games. So it's a little better than a couple of points a game. The Argos were 7-3 versus the East Division this season, but won those games by an average score of 29-22. So that is a full touchdown as an average score in their games against East Division opponents. The Argos also allowed the second fewest offensive touchdowns in the CFL this season. Season series between these two teams was 2-1 in favor of the Toronto Argos. Now that began in week 2, right at the beginning of the season. The Argos with a 1-point victory in Toronto, 20-19 over these Alouettes. And then they played back-to-back games in week 20 and week 21. Obviously very late in the season. You start resting some players, so it's tough to really gauge how much stock you put into these games at the end of the year. But Toronto went to Montreal in week 20, got a 1-point victory, 24-23. And then in week 21, they came up to Toronto, Montreal winning that game by 5, 38-33, on the back of a pretty strong performance, if I remember correctly, from Dominique Davis. Both of these teams are going to come into this game basically healthy, especially for the Toronto Argos, with Andrew Harris now returning to practice. He was a full participant in practice over the last couple of days. I think there's still some ambiguity about whether he starts or not, but I would certainly expect him to get some playing time in this, and that completely changes the dynamic of this Argos offense. Notably, there is still no Reggie White at practice for the Alouettes. I'd be very surprised if he plays. Before I tip my hat about who I think is going to actually win this game, I want to jump ahead and talk about the spread. Simply because the spread in this game, Toronto's laying 3.5 points as a home favorite. Should they be a home favorite? Absolutely they should. They're the East Division champions. They deserve that. When you're asking to buy the extra hook above the field goal, it's not the easiest equation there if you're an Argos backer, and this is not me saying anything against the Argos. I'd be saying it about any team when they're this evenly matched. Up to -3, I get it. When you're asking me to buy that extra hook, you're asking me to say that one of these teams is definitively better than the other one. And when you look at the results that these two teams have had all season long, 2 of their 3 games ended by a single point. And in the only game where there was enough of a margin of victory to cover -3.5, Montreal won that game outright by 5. So in all of these cases, the underdog at +3.5 was the way to go. This is one of those cases I think no matter who you think is going to win this game, hedging your bets and taking Montreal plus the points is the way to go with this game. So I'm 100% on Montreal plus 3.5. And I think I'm actually going to take them outright as well. There's nothing against the Argos. They had a great season this year. Great season against the East Division. A better season against the East than Montreal did. But if Montreal plays anywhere near the way they played last week on the offensive side and the defensive side, this is the kind of game that Trevor Harris is going to thrive in. The kind of game that Trevor Harris is going to put the Alouettes on his back and win. Only question now is the total. Total in this game is set at 48 points. It is lower than the West Final. And look, 2 of the 3 games that they played this season, the under would have hit this total. The last one that they played right in the last week of the season, it got to 71 points. Now, granted, a lot of that is with starters not playing. It's backups. And certainly on the defensive side, it means you're giving up a lot more. You're allowing a lot more on the scoreboard. But then I also look at like the average score in the Argos East Division games, and that's 51. And that's enough to hit the over here. I think I'm going to go over on these points. 48 is a pretty beatable number in the CFL. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the over here. Over 48 points in Montreal, Toronto. Let's go Alouettes 27, Argos 24. Got Montreal winning. Take the plus points with the Alouettes and go over on the point total. And before we talk about the West Final, I want to talk about the one thing that's getting me through this episode this week, and that's my great friends and sponsors at Nerd Teas. The literal name of this blend of tea that I'm drinking today is Flu Buster, because if I am getting a little seasonal flu, once again, it's not the big bad one, but if I'm getting a little seasonal flu, I'm going to be depending on this to get me through it. Nerdteas.ca is where you need to go to find dozens and dozens of incredible loose leaf tea and flavored coffee blends, something for absolutely every hot drinker on your Christmas list. It is not too late to start getting your Christmas orders in. It's getting close, but get those orders in now and you should be fine. Use my promo code, which is BWFinest. That's going to save you 15% at checkout. You're also going to get free shipping in Canada on any order over $100, which with shipping costs these days, that's an incredible value. So nerdteas.ca, promo code BWFinest, going to save you your 15%, going to get your free shipping. Find yourself something to love, or find someone you love something to love. You can do it on nerdteas.ca. So who do I have joining the Alouettes for the 109th Grey Cup? Let's take a look at the West Final. The BC Lions in Winnipeg to take on the Bombers. BC toppling Calgary very convincingly 30-16 in the West Division semifinal in order to have a berth in this game. The Lions now 13-6 on the season. They were a very solid 6-3 away from home this season. Scoring in those games was 236 to 219. So you look at, what's that, 25 points? 25 points in 9 games, 2.5 points on average. So that's, again, a fairly solid, fairly convincing margin of victory on the road this year. And last week, Nathan Rourke is back, baby. 321 yards passing, 2 scores through the air. We didn't really see him make plays with his feet, with his legs, which I would expect the coaching staff is like, maybe we don't do that for a little while. Let's save that to next season. But he had a really impressive performance throwing the ball. And the Lions as a whole forcing Jake Mayer to the bench. Bo Levi Mitchell comes back into that game for the Stampeders. And Keon Hatcher, a massive performance for the Lions. 8 catches, 162 receiving yards, and a score. He was the most targeted Lions receiver in Nathan Rourke's return. And when you look at my fantasy roster in a little bit, you're going to be like, why isn't Keon Hatcher on it? The Bombers closed the regular season with a 15-3 record, including a sparkling 8-1 record in their own building this year, scoring in those games 276 to 150. So 150 points allowed in 9 games. And they were an immaculate 10-1 against the West Division in 2022. Average score in those games, 33 to 22 possession games. And again, it's what don't they do well? What don't the Bombers do well on the offensive side, the defensive side, special teams, discipline? What doesn't this team do? Now, not even just well, exceptionally well. Now, that one West Division loss this year did come to the BC Lions. That happened in week 15. So the season series here was 2-1 in favor of the Bombers. They had that week 5, like that real show me game against Nathan Rourke and the BC Lions, kind of at the peak of their early season power. Winnipeg went up to BC and just said, like, hey kids, you're not ready yet. Beat them by 3 scores, 43 to 22. BC got that one back in the aforementioned week 15 game that was in BC. The Lions win that one 40 to 32. And in week 21, the Lions went back to Winnipeg at the end of the season. Bombers won that one comfortably 24 to 9. Still no Lucky Whitehead at practice for the BC Lions, so again, I'd be very surprised if we see him in the lineup. Otherwise, both of these teams are basically healthy. All the healthy scratches from previous weeks are back to practicing. I think aside from Lucky Whitehead, it's going to be all go for both of these rosters. And boy, when it's all go for the Bombers in Winnipeg, I don't know of a team that can consistently step to them. I guess this is a little anticlimactic, and it's certainly not to say that I was unimpressed by Nathan Rourke in his return. I certainly was impressed by Rourke in his return, but this just feels so similar to that week 5 game where it's like, okay, but like, let's be serious for a second. We're the studs in this league, and I think Winnipeg's going to show that one more time. So I'm on the Bombers in this game. Let's take Winnipeg at home to get the win over the BC Lions. Now, against the spread, the Bombers are laying 4.5 points at home. So you do have to lay a good number of points on the Bombers in order to take them here against the spread, especially like in a matchup with arguably the second best team in the entire CFL. In addition to being 6-3 on the road this year, the BC Lions were also 6-3 against the spread on the road this year and did perform slightly better against the spread than the Bombers did this year. I think they were both equally 11-7, but I think the Lions had some harder numbers to have to cover, except in this very specific scenario where the Lions are a marginal underdog. Like they're an underdog of less than a touchdown. In such games, they were only 1-3 against the spread this year. Again, as marginal underdogs, like let's say plus 6.5 or less, I believe is what it was. So only 1-3. They covered once in 4 opportunities. I think I got to give this one to the Bombers as well. I'm going to lay the points here with Winnipeg and take the Bombers minus the 4.5 points. I think they get it done. Again, they're so bloody dominant. Like they're so they're not impossible to beat because we saw it happen this year, but boy, it takes a lot to beat that team. Now, all BC has to do is win, but I still think the Bombers are going to take it, and I think the Bombers are going to cover, so that's the way I'm going against the spread. Total in the game set at 49.5 points. The Bombers have just been so good on defense at home all year long. 150 points against in 9 home games this year. It's nuts. If you can't score, you're not going to be able to beat this Bombers team. But I'm going to stick under on it because even in this game, in that week 5 game, like we talked about, the one where the Bombers won by 3 scores, they kind of confounded Nathan Rourke on the defensive side. Yes, he threw 3 touchdowns. A couple of those were not garbage time scores, but they were scores where he just decided, I'm just going to take the ball and throw it 9 straight downs and just march down the field when I'm trailing by 3 scores. So he had 3 touchdowns, but he threw 2 interceptions, and he didn't throw very many interceptions this year, period. So I think that Bombers defense is going to be capable of confounding Nathan Rourke. They get the win, and I'm going to stick under the point total of 49.5. Let's go Bombers 24, Lions 14. So we're going to go Winnipeg winning, Winnipeg covering, and give me the under on the points. There you have it, folks. My projected matchup for Grey Cup 109 is the Montreal Alouettes and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. That game taking place in Regina, Saskatchewan. Obviously not this coming Sunday, but next Sunday, the 20th. I cannot wait to watch that game, whoever happens to be in it, but that's how I'm predicting. I'm going Winnipeg and Montreal in the 109th Grey Cup. Who are you predicting? I'll go over my picks here one more time. I got the Alouettes beating Toronto 27-24. Als straight up. Als plus 3.5 against the spread in a game that goes over 48.5. And then I've got Winnipeg 24-14 over BC. Bombers win, Bombers cover, and under the 49.5 point total. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at NerdTees. Thanks for sticking with me while I'm gutting out this whatever it happens to be. I'm hoping to look better and sound better for the Grey Cup episode, which will be coming up in just a week's time. We'll see you then.